Site there. Hello everyone. Good evening everyone. This is Govind Kumar Chaturvedi. Thank you for joining us today. We are proud to present season 2 of the Lawyers with lecture series. Today's webinar is brought to you in collaboration with the Virtual Lawyer. Over the course of this month, we will be conducting a number of webinars on all relevant topics of law. I'm proud to present today's webinar on the topic of cooperative societies by respected speaker, Senior Advocate Rakesh Munjal sir. Without much further ado, now I'll be handing over the mic for introduction to Mr. Bhatta.
Very good evening to everybody, and I would like to introduce the speaker for the day. Mr. Rakesh Munjal is a designated senior advocate. He's also the president of SARC Law India chapter presently. He's also the managing trustee of Delhi High Court Advocates Welfare Trust. Previously, he has been the vice president of the ILI for the tenure of 2010-2016, wherein with the Honorable CJI, who happened to be the president of this ILI, and they had visited Harvard University, Georgia University, American Law Institute in the USA, along with the collaboration of ILI. He has also represented ILI in the BRICS law at Shanghai. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
So today's topic is cooperative society, and as far as the circulation of the posters have been, we have received huge number of responses as regards the topic. We want you to give an overview of the law relating to cooperative societies at first, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. As far as the law relating to the cooperative societies are concerned, I may start with it. That why the cooperative societies, why this movement started. In fact, the movement started in order to give a benefit only to the downtrodden people who could not afford the big houses or even to set up the banks where people could take loans in the small denominations. There could be agricultural societies, there could be thrift and credit societies. So there were various kinds of societies. However, the societies, in fact, which are registered, they are primarily on the basis of the cooperative principles. If the objects of a society that satisfies the cooperative principles, now these cooperative principles have been defined in first schedule of the Multi-State Cooperative Societies Act. I will just read that because that is going to be the foundation. The first cooperative principle is that a voluntary and the open membership. There, as far as the societies are concerned, they cannot restrict the membership. I will come to it later where some of the societies, they had really restricted the membership to a particular class or to a particular religion or to a particular community. So that is in fact not permissible in the cooperatives. The second is the democratic control. What is expected of any cooperative society is that there would be elections, there would be a democratic setup, and therefore the cooperative societies will be managed by their managing committees as well as by the general bodies, where they will divide the powers as to what will be the power of a particular managing committee, what is the power of going to be the general body. Then members' economic participation. Because as far as the members are concerned, they have to contribute. Now, like in the housing societies, it's the members who contribute for their own flats or for their own plots. So it is their own participation. It is not something coming otherwise from outside. Then it comes the autonomy and independence. The cooperatives are autonomous self-help organizations controlled by their members only. It is not controlled by the outsiders. Then there is an education and training and the information programs. And there is and these societies must have the concern for the community. Now, the process for registration of a cooperative society is if all these cooperative principles are satisfied, then minimum 10 members. If it's a society which is to be registered within the state, which is not a multi-state cooperative societies, I'll come to that later. Then the minimum number of members which is required is 10. However, in Delhi, in 1983, when the societies were registered, because the land which was being allotted to the group housing societies was minimum 1 acre. Therefore, what was expected was that a society must have at least 60 members, because in 1 acre of land, they could have constructed 60 flats. So that was a minimum number which they had kept. Like in the multi-state cooperative societies act, you must have at least 100 members from each state. There should be minimum 2 states, and then you can get a society registered. I mean, then you can apply for it. After you have applied, the registrar of the cooperative societies, if it is in the state, he will see whether the bylaws which you are proposing, they actually satisfy the cooperative principles or not. If they satisfy the cooperative principles, then the society is registered by the registrar. Now, after the registration of the society, there are certain obligations of the managing committees. The obligations are their holding of the meetings of the managing committee regularly, their holding of the general body, at least one general body in a year where they can approve their audited accounts, where they can also make their own program for the coming year. So that is something which they give in the general body meeting. Now, these societies are also liable to have their own annual audits. Now, these annual audits are conducted by the Registrar of Cooperative Societies. Registrar appoints an auditor, because earlier they have to have their own officials from their own office, but these days what is being done is that the auditors are appointed, basically the chartered accountants from outside, and the societies they pay from their own funds. So audit is now there are after the audit is also complete, because audit gives the health of a society, and anybody can go and have a copy of the audit report either under RTI or even otherwise from the office of the registrar. It's a public document. So from there one can get to know. Now there are certain pitfalls. Now suppose somebody wants to become a member of a society, what one should do? Because invariably what I have seen is that the persons who go and they become the members of the societies, they don't even look at the bylaws. They do not know what are the qualifications for becoming a member of a particular society.
Right.
What do? They will just fill up the form and they will give an undertaking saying that I have gone through the bylaws, I agree to abide by the bylaws of the society, and subsequently they suffer. Because
Right.
suppose the bylaws are saying that look, an individual could be that a person, suppose he is an employee of Ministry of Rehabilitation, it's only he could become the member of that society. When subsequently
Right.
it found that he was not a employee of the Ministry of Rehabilitation, so therefore his member itself was bad right from the beginning itself. So he will not be getting the benefits at a later stage, right? So this
About
is
the
all
membership, who can be a member of cooperative society?
See, a person who is adult, that means he's 18 years of age. Once he is 18 years of age, and he also qualifies the bylaw 4 or 5, I mean, depending upon the different bylaws and different societies, there they have given these conditions. As I said, Ministry of Rehabilitation.
Right.
Similarly, now there is a society in Bombay. There only the Zoroastrian they could become the members. Their case went right up to the Supreme Court on this issue. Then there was this CWPC, that's CWPD, now CPWD. Now, because earlier when these societies were registered, in fact, the registrars of different states, even they were also not bothered. But now at least they check this, that the membership has to be an open membership and it has to be voluntary as per the cooperative principles. earlier some of the societies were registered like this, and people are fighting still, even as on date, on these very bylaws itself. That look, they said that we never knew, but they had given an undertaking that look, we have gone through the bylaws and we are eligible to become the members. So a person who's an adult, and if he pays his admission fee and the share money, then one can apply to the society. The managing committee has to pass a resolution enrolling him as a member. And after he has been enrolled, he's issued a share certificate. See, between a company and a cooperative society, the difference is even if you are holding, say, 100 shares in a cooperative society, you have only one vote. Like in a company, you can have, if you are having 100 shares, you have got a power of voting of 100 shares. That's a distinction insofar as the voting pattern is concerned.
Right. Sir, also I would like to know which is the competent authority to register a cooperative society.
Under the state laws, because this is a state subject as well. So under the state law, it is the register of cooperatives of a particular state who registers it. Whereas in a suppose there is a multi-state cooperative society. Multi-state means where the members are from 2 or more states. Then in those cases, it is the central registrar who sits in the office of this Ministry of Agriculture. However, some of the powers of the central registrar have also been delegated to the state registrars, but insofar as the registration is concerned, that is with the central registrar.
Okay. And sir, what are the different kinds of cooperative societies?
See, as far as the different kinds of societies are concerned, as I have already said, that there can be housing. Even in housing, there are 2 types of societies. One is a group housing, that means a platted one. Then there is a plotted one. They are called a house building. We have got thrift and trade societies which give the loans to the people. We have got a cooperative banks. We have got agricultural societies. We have got multi-state, multi-purpose societies. Multi-purpose societies means a society can do various functions, including the agriculture. They can give that, because they are basically they are in the rural areas. So they have been given that power that they can do multi-purpose within the villages itself.
What precaution should a person take before becoming a member of a cooperative society?
See, one has to be very clear about one aspect as to what is he going to achieve by becoming a member. That's the first thing which should be there in one's mind. As I have said, that suppose somebody is becoming a member, say for taking a flat or a plot from a society, then he must look at the bylaws. Whether under the bylaws he can become or he cannot become a member. That is one. Similarly, even in some of the cooperative societies, say Khatri Co-op, we have got, say, where you have only Khatris. Right. We have got Vaishya banks in Delhi. You know, they say Vaishya Cooperative Bank and all that. What they are enrolling is a particular community who can become the members. And subsequently, when you go for their the benefits, say suppose you want to take a loan, then they create a lot of hurdle. So, one has to first look at the bylaws, and after looking at the bylaws, only then one should go and apply for the membership. See, ultimate aim is to, when you become a member, you want to take some benefit out of the society. No doubt, you also have to contribute something to the society, but at the same time, when you are wanting some benefit, then you have to be sure whether that benefit can be actually given to you or not.
Right. So, sir, once somebody has enrolled as a member, what rights and liabilities arise out of that membership in a particular society?
As far as the rights are concerned, rights would only come mainly for what he has become a member. He will claim those rights like flats, plots, even agricultural land, because they are also allotted by the multi-purpose societies. Then when you go to the bank, you ask for a loan also, or you go to thrift and trade societies, they will give you that. So these are the things on which you can really get the benefits of the society. As far as your liabilities are concerned, your bylaws will say that in case tomorrow it is found that suppose the society gets liquidated. On liquidation, then you have a liability, say 10 times, 100 times, 50 times. Now suppose you have one share. So against one share, suppose you are having a share of say 100 rupees. The liability is say 100 times. So you will have to pay 100 times of this. That would be your liability if any loss occurs to the society at the time of liquidation. So those are the liabilities of an individual member. But as a liability of the office bearers, there are many, because all these office bearers have to act within the powers which have been conferred upon them under the Act, rules, and the bylaws. If they act beyond that, then the liability can be fastened upon them.
So, sir, what should be kept in mind while bylaws are being framed for a particular cooperative society? What are the prerequisites which every society should keep in mind by when they frame the bylaws?
Now, while framing the bylaws, the first and the fundamental thing is that they must ensure that your bylaws are in conformity with the cooperative principles. Two, ultimately, what you are going to achieve by incorporating a society. See, society as basically is nothing but it's a compendium of the members only. It's the members who contribute for that. Ultimately, if the members are contributing something, so they must know, even the people who are the promoter members, they must know as to what exactly are they going to achieve. So if for the achievement of that, they must frame their bylaws in conformity with the objectives for which they are going to be getting the society incorporated. So that is
While
something which
talking
has to
about
be kept in mind.
Right. Sir, while talking about the principles, what are the general principles that a cooperative society has to take care of while it is incorporated?
See, as see the first and the foremost principle is the voluntary and the open membership.
Okay.
See, there should not be any condition on that.
Okay.
Those conditions were, as I told you earlier, those conditions were being put earlier. Like they said, Zoroastrian Cooperative Group, that housing society in Bombay. Similarly, in Delhi, we have got CPWD. Then we have got certain societies like we have Jhang Cooperative, Multan Cooperative. You know, people coming from Multan of erstwhile Pakistan. You know, they were coming to India. They were having these kind of society, but they were restricting that membership. Now you see, after these cooperative principles have come, now this kind of a restriction cannot be there, and even otherwise, the courts have held that wherever these kind of conditions have been put, they are void. They are not really holding good for this. There are judgments to that effect.
So, sir, in practicality, how do societies function? And we would also want you to share a few experiences of yours that how the societies ought to function, whereas how societies are functioning in practicality.
See, as far as their functioning is concerned, basically, you see, if you really want to know about something which is practical, invariably every society is run by only very few office bearers. Suppose there are 11 say managing, there are 11 total members of managing committee. It is invariably run by 2, 3, or 4 people, not by all. Even
Right.
at times, you know, the other office bearers or say the members of the committee, they may not even be knowing about it because they are the ones who take interest. See, the services which they provide, they are all uh, free. They don't charge, they cannot even charge even a penny from the society. And therefore, you know, some of them, I will not say all, but some of them do have some interest in doing this also. That is there.
So, sir, talking about the managing committee, what are the consequences if the managing committee commits persistent defaults or acts against the law or its bylaws? So, maybe the statute or maybe the bylaws. What are the consequences if there are persistent defaults?
See, the cooperative law envisages in all these cooperative enactments in all states that if a managing committee commits persistent defaults, either in the performance of their duties or otherwise they act against the law itself, then a managing committee can be superseded. Now, in the case of a supersession of a managing committee, the registrar of cooperative societies can supersede the managing committee and can appoint an administrator, either one administrator or a committee of administrators. Then the administrators, they carry out the functions of the managing committee. However, there are certain restrictions which are put on the administrators by the registrar of cooperative societies. Because there the registrar can say that, look, the administrator will do only this. So, I'll tell you what. Example. Now, there is a society which doesn't get the audits done. Because every year the audit has to be done within 6 months of the close of the financial year. Suppose they are not getting it done. The registrar appoints an audit, this administrator. Then he has to get the audit completed. Similarly, if the society is not getting the elections done, which is another uh, obligation which has been put on the committee in office. If they don't do it, then the registrar can again appoint an administrator, then this administrator has to get the elections conducted. Similarly, if they are acting against the interest of the society. Now, suppose there is a condition, say, in a bank, in a financial bank, cooperative bank, or in a financial society, suppose the loan which can be given is, say, the amount is, say, 20,000 or 50,000 to an individual member. They give, say, about, say, a lakh of rupees. So they are again violating their own bylaws or their own resolutions. So in those cases, the administrator can take an action, they can get the recoveries done, they can supersede the managing committee. So these are the actions which the registrar can take against the society. So basically, it's a supersession is the first one. If even after supersession it is found that there are certain things which cannot be recovered, or there are certain things where things cannot be really brought to a particular level, then the society can be, then the administrator itself can refer it to the registrar, proposing to liquidate the society. Because at times, the financial position of society goes so bad.
Right.
And this can be found only either by the administrator or by the auditors.
Right.
Now, if that is a situation that comes, then in that particular situation, the administrator can also refer for the liquidation, and even otherwise the registrar can ask for the liquidation of the society.
Right. Sir, we've often heard that the managing committee creates a lot of problems for the members of the society. How would you like to comment upon this?
Yes, it's a common experience of everyone. I mean, I will not say it's mine, it's even for the individual members also. Because once they are in power and they feel that, look, they are the bosses, without realizing that, look, they are also, they have to work under certain parameters of law itself. Like, I'll give you one example. Now, suppose somebody dies and one goes for seeking the transfer of membership in their own records. They will not transfer. They will start creating problems, one or the other. And all these things, they generally happen in the housing societies because their stakes are so high for the individuals who go for and seek the transfer of membership. So that is one area where there is a lot of problem. Whereas this problem doesn't exist in thrift and credit societies or even the cooperative banks also. Because invariably, as far as the thrift and credit societies or the banks are concerned, they tell the individual that, look, your stakes are only to the financial aspect. Whatever are the deposits, you please take the money. Either you become a member or you take the money. But in so far as the housing societies are concerned, yes, there are problems, and managing committees, they do create problems. Because what they say, suppose a person who dies has got, say, 3 legal heirs. Now, first thing is they will say, okay, you get NOC from all of them. Now, one person is staying abroad. He will send an NOC from there. They will insist, no, it should have been done. It should, I mean, say, even the NOC will say either by way of an affidavit, it should have been done in India. Or they will insist, no, get the relinquishment deed. A person is sitting in England or say in America or in Australia, how would he give a relinquishment deed while sitting there?
Right.
These kind of problems are there.
Right. Similarly, talking about the registrars, that on account of society, what breach of law do they commit?
See, registrar, as far as they are concerned, yes, there are a lot of problems which the offices of the registrar also creates for the societies as well as for the individuals.
Right,
Now, some of the officers are really good.
right,
I will not say that all the officers are bad,
right,
but the problem is when the something starts on the bottom, say from the clerk who starts with it, going to the superintendent, then to the assistant registrar, going to the deputy registrar, then the joint registrar, then the additional registrar and the registrar. You know, amongst all this, at least you'll find one.
right,
You'll find one who may not like either like to work
right,
or who's otherwise not efficient. So
right.
with the result, you know, the files they don't move.
So, sir, are there any provisions for inspection or inquiry of a cooperative society by the registrar of cooperative
Yes,
society?
yes. If there are, see, if there are complaints against managing committee or the general body or the society in general as it is, then when the members they make a complaint, then there are powers which have been conferred upon the registrar to order the inspection. And after, and if in the first instance, if after the inspection something comes up, then they can order an inquiry. After holding an inquiry where they appoint an inquiry officer, who's generally a senior officer, then they can also fix the liability on the erring office bearers of the society. Because if suppose it is found that look, the loss has been caused to the society on account of certain office bearers, then that can be recovered from those office bearers. Now, what we see in general is here also, you know, it really needs an application of mind by the office of the registrar or by those persons who fix the liability. Invariably, the liabilities are fixed on those persons who were not even at the hem of affair when in fact those acts or omissions took place. What they will say is that the present managing committee members like fix the liability on them. Instead of going back and saying that look, during this period this loss was caused, these were the office bearers. So you know you need those kind of smart officers. I mean, and then you know the litigation starts. Once that litigation starts, that will go for years together. And by the time those litigations are over, the person who actually had done something, you will find that they are no more.
I think that applies for the general practice in litigation also. So it's better to be cautious than actually getting into this. So, sir, as per the statute, we would want to know that as per the statute, who has to get the annual audits of the society done?
See, it is the managing committee who has to initiate the process. The
Okay.
managing committee has to, in fact, ask the office of the registrar to appoint a auditor. Now, in some of the states, they have modified the procedure. They say that, okay, let the society should, because they have a panel of auditors. Now, what they say is that in some of those states, that you give us three names. They ask the society, you give us three names. Then out of those three names, the office of the registrar will say, okay, you get your audit done from this particular auditor. This is a practice which is now being adopted, but in ultimately the auditor who is appointed is basically an auditor of the office of the registrar only, who's on their panel. An
Okay.
outsider cannot do the audit.
Right. Right. This is what we were wanting to know. Now, sir, we also want to know that when can a managing committee be superseded by the registrar? In what all circumstances is this done?
See, as I've told you, when as far as the supersession is concerned, if a particular managing committee acts against the interest of the members of the society, or otherwise it violates the otherwise the provisions of law, then the managing committee can be superseded by the registrar. There is a set procedure. Before supersession, the registrar cooperative societies has to give a notice to the managing committee of the society. The managing committee is first heard. Now, in the case of the cooperative banks, these people, as far as cooperative banks are concerned, before superseding the board of a cooperative bank, the registrar has to take a approval, the prior approval of the Reserve Bank of India as well.
Okay, right. So these days, sir, we also see that there are many cooperative societies who are going into liquidation. So when can a cooperative society go for liquidation?
See, as far as the liquidation part is, that's a last step. It's basically a death of a cooperative society when we say it goes for liquidation. Now, as far as the liquidation is concerned, for that, you see the either the total number of members should fall below 10, which is the minimum number required for registration. Similarly, in the case of, see, I'll tell you one more difference. In the Multi-State Cooperative Societies Act, where we have the members of different states, there is no provision of appointment of the administrator.
Okay.
There, you see, if the society has been acting against the interests of the members of the society or otherwise has been committing certain defaults, then in that particular case, the only option which is available with the central registrar is to liquidate the society. There is no provision for appointment of the administrator in that.
Okay.
This provision is there in the states.
Okay.
So as far as the liquidation is concerned, either the society doesn't have the sufficient assets to achieve its object. Now, if they don't have the objects, then what is the purpose of keeping the society alive?
Right.
So in that particular situation, the registrar can liquidate the society itself. Or when the total number falls below number 10, or say in the multi-state, it goes below 100 in each state, then the registrar can order the liquidation of the society.
Right. Sir, are there also provisions in law for the prosecution of office bearers of the society?
Yes, there are provisions. See, the provisions are like in Delhi, I can say, if the society has been given the land and the flats have been allotted, the procedure is that it's first the registrar of cooperative societies has to grant the clearance. Then the Delhi Development Authority has to make an allotment. So in that particular case, it's the DDA, who is the lessor, has to make that allotment. If the society on its own makes the allotment, then there is a prosecution. Prior to all this, you need a sanction of the registrar of cooperative societies. Similarly, if the records of the society have been forged or fabricated, again there is a prosecution under the law, under the cooperative law itself. It is not that you are going otherwise to the police straight. Here also you need a sanction from the registrar of cooperative societies. But unfortunately, see, in all these cases, what we have seen is that even the registrar doesn't grant the sanction. And these office bearers, they go scot-free. The very, very few cases in which the registrar has granted the sanction for prosecution, despite the societies having asked for it.
So what is the remedy in this case, sir?
The remedies, and again, you have to go to the court, file a writ petition, seek a mandamus to the registrar that he must grant the sanction, because that's how they have to follow the procedure.
Right. Sir, also tell me about the cooperative banks. So are cooperative banks also governed by the Reserve Bank of India?
Yes, now you see with the latest amendment, now they will be governed by the Reserve, under the Banking Regulation Act also. Earlier, they were not coming straight under the RBI. It was only for the purpose of registration or say for the appointment of the administrator that the registrars, they will taking the approval of the. But however, the NABARD was one, because NABARD was the one which was giving certain loans to these banks, the state banks. So they were being consulted on that. But now, after the recent this Parliament's amendment, which has now a few days back, which has been passed, so now they are under that. So cooperative banks are also now under the purview of the Reserve, this Banking Regulation Act. However, I do not know whether it's really going to benefit the cooperative banks or not, because once that interference will come, I don't think that the cooperative banks will be able to do their business so freely as they were doing it earlier.
So, sir, with this amendment, what are the other major aspects which you would like to throw light upon by this amendment which has come up?
See, it's basically the regulation. See, they are going to regulate their own procedures, their appointments. See, there is no doubt. as far as the appointments in the cooperative banks are concerned, it is something like this. Suppose you are a director in a bank, or you are the managing director, or you are the president of elect of that. So you were really, I will say, appointing your own people as the employees of the bank and all that. Now, at least, every bank will have to frame their own rules, though banks have shown that they have got the rules. I'm not saying that they don't show, but the manner in which the appointments are made, they were not really following it properly. Now, at least they will have to go by the regulations which may be provided by the Reserve Bank of India. So with that, there is going to be a lot of, I will not call it interference, but yes, they will be regulating that in the cooperative banks.
Right. So, sir, one dispute which we often say is that if there's a housing cooperative society and they've come into an agreement with the developer to develop a land, and if the developer fails to develop that land, now what are the rights and obligations with respect to the developer and the office bearers of the cooperative society and the members?
So yeah, there is a procedure prescribed under the law itself, under the cooperative law itself. See, the procedure is in so far as the appointment of the architect and the builders are concerned, what they need to do is they have to place their agreements before the general body. First, they appoint the architect. Whatever is the agreement that comes, that is placed before the general body. General body approves it. But my experience has shown that that agreement is not even seen by the members. And the members are just informed that we are appointing so and so.
Right.
Because in fact, that agreement is never circulated along with the agenda notice,
Right.
which should be done.
Right.
Now, once the architect has been appointed, because then the architect will also have a clause of arbitration. Suppose tomorrow society has a dispute with the architect, then in that situation, then it must be specified whether it is going for an arbitration or it is going to the civil court. Now, once the architect has been appointed, then the architect prepares all these papers, like the tender documents. Then they invite the tender. Now, when the tender is invited, though it is basically the invitation is by the society itself, but these documents, because as far as the societies are concerned, they are not experts. They are guided by the architect. Now, those tender documents are kept. Then they issue a NIT, that's called a notice inviting tenders. When the tenders are received, then they decide as to who should be offered and what rate should be there. At times they go by the L1, that's the lowest one. Or at times they go with the reputation of a particular builder. Right. So then actually it should come before the general body as to what are the rates and all that. But my experience shows that even those documents are not placed before the general body, and general body approves it because they are just informed that, look, we have received so many tenders. This is L1, L2, L3 like this. So we are actually approving this for this reason. And then they approve it. But invariably, these people, the members, they do not know. Because when the tender is issued, in that, suppose there are, say, 100 items which are to be quoted. Some of them will quote only 95, and then they give a particular amount. Some will quote 90. So who's quoting 90 would be the L1. Because their rates will be dependent upon those 90. They will, for the remaining 10, they will say as per the consumption, they will charge. This is how the things they move, and that's how these members, they suffer at a later stage. Today, suppose the society says, okay, we'll give a flat, say for 1 crore. Tomorrow it is found that, look, they have to pay, say, 1.5 crores. And obviously they will cry. Because when they approve that tender or they approve that particular appointment of that particular builder, they were not even knowing it.
Right. But now they are bound by that.
But now they are bound. I mean, then everybody says that you should have asked for the tenders. You should have seen it.
Right.
So these are the problems which the members faces at a later stage.
What remedy do they have if they have to contest the same?
See, I'll tell you, the reason is then they will continue to fight. And ultimately, they will get nothing. There is a reason for this. They will say that we were not informed. The management will say that, look, we had kept it there, you have not seen it. When we gave this, you should have come, either you should have asked for it, because nobody asked for it. And even if suppose a person like me also, if I'm a member of society, I'm not going to get into that. I'm not expert in so far as what all items would be there, what would be their cost.
Right.
So ultimately, it is some expert who has to decide. Then, in that way, even the architect, he should be held responsible for all this, because when you are giving, say, 100 items which are to be quoted, and when these figures are being given,
Right.
he's an expert, then he should inform. And
Right.
generally, he will say that, look, I did my job, I gave it to the managing committee, they did it. So then they try to go out of it.
Right. So, sir, the next thing I would want to put to you is that now after RERA coming into picture, cooperative societies, the functioning of cooperative society, the law of cooperative society and RERA, they have to go hand in hand. So how is that being done?
See, as far as the REDA is concerned, REDA, you see, it's a 2016 Act,
Right.
which in effect came into force with effect from 1st of July 2017, because by that time every society had to get itself registered.
Right.
But unfortunately, you see, there were many societies which had completed the construction
Right.
before this date, but
Right.
they had applied for the completion.
Right.
They were not issued the completion by the municipal authority.
Right.
Now, if they have not issued, they can't be held responsible for this. Correct? Now, what like in Delhi, I mean, I am seeing in a few cases where even the registrar is insisting that you must have a registration with REDA, which can't be. And even otherwise, in Delhi, that is not even the requirement under the cooperative law itself.
Right.
I mean, that's basically a harassment to the society as well as to its members.
Right.
But if you look at the rules of UP, they specifically says that if you have applied for the completion certificate, then you don't require the registration. See, the act is same everywhere.
State rules differ. And
See,
you only exception talking that if you've applied, we give an
you have
example.
applied, you see, then you are not entitled. I mean, they are right in saying so.
Right.
I mean, why should somebody be put to harassment? Rather, the authorities should be there to help the society and the members. If they are able to show that, look, my project was. See, if you look at a language of Section 3, Section 3 says that if it is an ongoing project and the completion certificate has not been issued. So there are two conditions which are to be satisfied as on the date of application. If it is an ongoing project.
Right.
If it is not an ongoing project, how can you go and apply for it?
Right. An ongoing project is absolutely directly proportional with the completion certificate being in place.
Yes, and once you have applied for the completion certificate, then that's the end of the matter. Then that's the end of the matter.
Right.
So
Right.
that is the situation.
So how is it going to be harmonized? What do you feel? What is the future with cooperative societies and RERA being
I'll
had?
tell you, I think this is a problem only with a few societies, not with all. But still, neither the government nor any other authority has amended the Delhi Cooperative Societies Act, where they say that this would be a requirement for the clearance of membership of a particular society. See, this act is of 2016. We are in 2020. Either they should have amended the act or their rules saying this, that this will be this will be a mandatory requirement. See, both the acts are different. They have a different purpose to achieve. But insistence by the registrar of cooperative societies is nothing but an act of harassment as far as. But if I go by the other acts, as I told, you look at UP, then where is the question? I mean, they must be guided by the other legislations also, which are under the same act itself.
Right.
How can you have the two different meanings of the same act?
Yeah.
Because they also say that, look, the first part is that if it is an ongoing project, if it is not an ongoing project, how can you go for this?
Right, right. So you feel that the Uttar Pradesh rules are the most ideal ones in terms of ongoing project, and that those
Yes,
should apply to
yes.
the states.
If you go, see, there are so many projects which are going on, say in Noida, Ghaziabad, Greater Noida, or even you go further on the Yamuna Expressway right up to this Agra. So
Right,
many projects which are going on. Now, all those projects which in fact had applied before this 1st of July 2017, they had not applied. I mean, they were free to do whatever they wanted to.
right, right, right. So, sir, we have been live on Facebook and YouTube, and there have been questions from the participants, which Janvi has put to us. So, I'm going to put them to you. So the first question is, what if the flat has two parking allotted by the builder after paying stamp duty for the area of parking slot, then later member of the society object?
No, and see, I'll tell you, as far as the parking is concerned, what we need to see is right in the beginning itself when you book a flat. Because in some of the societies, the parkings are the common areas, correct? And in some of the societies, these are the part of the flat itself, where you have to pay for it. A similar case was there in Delhi. In that particular case, see, each flat was given one parking. Subsequently, the gentleman sold his flat but kept the parking to himself, went to other society. He used to park his car, one car here, and the other car he was parking in the other society. So that's how the fight came. But what you need to see is what exactly was the agreement right in the beginning which the member had with the society. Now having two parkings, I'll give you an example because that's a live example which I have seen in one of my own relatives' case. When you're actually constructing the parkings there, at times it's a bigger space. So if it's a bigger space, now in that particular space, two cars can come one after the other. So that means, it cannot be allotted to two persons because one car comes in front and the second car comes behind it.
Right.
So if suppose they are allotted to two different persons, then obviously there'll be a dispute. Whosoever will come first, he will park it first. The second one will come, he will park it after that. And if the first one has to go out, then he'll go and fight that, look, I have to go out, remove your car and all that. But as far as two parkings in those situations are concerned, it is permissible. But otherwise, first and the foremost requirement which is there in the societies and which is generally followed is that each flat is given one particular parking. At times, it's an open parking. At times, it's a stilt parking. They are given one stilt parking. And after that, suppose somebody wants a second parking, they are given the parking in the open area. They have to first satisfy their members insofar as the stilt parking is concerned.
Right. So the next question is, can cooperative society give rent receipts for 6 months to the occupants directly?
Yes, why not? There's no bar.
Okay. Then the next is what to do if you want to transfer name of house from one family member to another.
Yes, it is permissible. See, I'll tell you, as far as the transfer from one family member to the other family member is concerned, if there is a sale deed in the name of one, now if it is to be transferred in the name of the other family member, then you have to see the state law. First thing is, see, it will tend amount to a gift.
Right.
Suppose A has paid, say, a lakh of rupee for the flat. Now it is being transferred to B. B is a family member, which is permissible even under the income tax law. Then it will be treated as a gift. So there will be no gift tax. And so far the gift tax is concerned. But yes, if that is to be transferred in the name of whatever would be the duty which is to be paid to the municipal authority, that will have to be paid. Like when you go and gift your property in the name of any of your family members, you will not be paying the gift tax, but you have to pay the transfer duty. Transfer duty has to be paid to the municipal authority.
Okay, I think that would suffice the participant's question. Now, the next is till what extent is this true that guest parking is legal in a cooperative society housing?
See, as far as the guest parking is concerned, that depends upon the availability. See, if there is a land, if there is a space available within the society, then the societies they may provide some area within the society itself, saying this that this will be the guest parking. Otherwise, generally what the societies are doing, they are not allowing the guest parking inside the complex. What they are saying is you park it outside the society, and then the guards who are there at the gate, they are the ones who take care of them. As a matter of right, they cannot come and suppose that there is no parking available, and if the member himself comes, if he has to park, then he will not be getting the space.
Right, so there's another question by some Dharani, and I'll just read it out to you. It says, I purchased a flat through the Army Welfare Housing Organization, Ministry of Defense, and I paid full payment towards the parking lot. On possession, I found that the parking lot allotted to me was ordinary shed without any locking facilities, which is open from all the sides. I mean, no protection from rain, wind, etc. The previous employees who were first allottees were given full parking with the better facilities. The Army Welfare Housing intimated that the late allottees are given only shed as parking, whereas the amount paid by allottees are same and no discount was given. Can appeal be given to these allottees?
See, I'll tell you, as far as the AWHO is concerned, Army Welfare Housing Organization, it is not a cooperative society. It is basically a society which is registered under the Societies Registration Act.
Okay.
So, if at all they have a dispute with AWHO, they will have to go to the civil court.
Okay.
The remedy would be only civil court, not the registrar.
Okay.
Two, the second situation is that as far as the shared parking is concerned, they have to see shared parking. I don't understand whether it's an open parking or it's a still parking. If, as per their original agreement with the society, if they were to be given a stilt parking means that, see, I'll tell you, stilt parking is never a covered parking. Covered means it is covered from the top, but from all sides it is not covered. It's always because in the stilt areas you cannot have divisions. That is not permissible under law. Though some of the societies or the individuals they build their own walls and they do it, but otherwise it is not permissible. Stilt areas cannot be divided into parkings. So as far as this is concerned, they can always go to the civil court.
Okay. So now, looking at the time, I think this is the right time for a vote of thanks. I would request Advocate Janvi Sharma to give the vote of thanks to Mr. Rakesh Munjal. Over to you, Janvi.
Thank you, Harshit.
Thank you, Harshit.
Rakesh, sir, thank you so much for taking out the time on a busy day and for telling us such important things regarding, a very important field of law, which is not talked about as much as it should. And, while you have been giving your webinar, we have been monitoring over Facebook and over YouTube, and we are getting so many questions. We are flooded with questions. So that just shows that how we don't have enough information being told to the people regarding the laws related to cooperative societies. And you have today clarified so much of it that, I think it'll help all of us, the audience, as well as young lawyers in the future for, when we work. So thank you, sir, for taking out the time and for giving us such an interesting interactive session. I would like to thank you on behalf of Divyanshu and Latest Laws. I would like to thank you on behalf of Tarveen Singh Nanda and Lawyers Wit. I would like to thank you on behalf of Professor Manjula Batra and the virtual lawyer. I would like to thank Harshit Batra, who's an advocate, a RERA expert, and a co-team member of the virtual lawyer. I would like to thank Govind Chaturvedi, who's an advocate, a trademark attorney, as well as a co-team member of the virtual lawyer. And Paratosh Dhawan, an advocate and a core member of Team Virtual Lawyer, who's been monitoring all the comments and questions and, giving it to us here. Sir, I don't have words to thank you today. It is a brilliant session that you have given us, and we hope that you can be a part of other webinars for us as well in the future. I would also take this opportunity to announce that we have a webinar by Harshit Batra on 27th on RERA laws at 2 p.m. on the Lawyers Wit Facebook page. It will be live streamed on the YouTube channel as well. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining, and thank you for a wonderful session.
Thank you, Janvi. Thank you, Arshit.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.